We haven't always made bad decisions. My parents' generation, the grandparents of the students in the audience, made some very good decisions. This is a graph of the number of major environmental laws passed in the United States per decade since the 1950s. And what you see is the 1960s, 70s, and 80s were the heyday of passing environmental laws. Some of you who are younger may not even realize what these laws did. This is a picture of air pollution in Beijing today. Believe it or not, American cities looked like this in the 50s and 60s, but they don't anymore thanks to one of those laws, the Clean Air Act. Likewise, incredibly, rivers used to be so polluted in many American cities that they literally caught fire. But they don't anymore thanks to the Clean Water Act. So these laws worked. But something has happened since then. Since the 1990s, this country has passed no major environmental laws. There has been no major progress during the lifetimes of today's students, even graduate students in some cases. Well, environmental protection threatens profits of environmentally damaging activities. And some, certainly by no means all, but some people whose profits are threatened therefore object to environmental protection. And what's happened since then is they've tricked us into not passing any laws. See, they can't argue that environmental protection is a bad idea or that damage to the planet is a good thing. Nobody's going to buy that. And they can't argue that their profits are more important than the planet. Nobody's going to buy that. So they have to take a different approach. And the approach they've taken is to work behind the scenes to manipulate public debate. And they do this several ways. I have time to talk about 4 ways that we've been tricked. And for short, to help you remember them, I'm going to refer to them as certainty, freedom, jobs, and profit. Let's begin with certainty. No matter how good our understanding of an environmental problem, opponents of environmental protection will argue that we just don't understand it well enough to act. This has been going on with regard to climate change for decades, even though well over 90% of qualified scientists think we do understand it well enough to act. This is a double standard. In other circumstances, we understand the danger of putting off decisions indefinitely. If you're ill, if one of your loved ones is ill, you go to the physician, you expect the physician to analyze the situation carefully, examine the patient, run the necessary tests, and come up with a treatment plan, but not put off years and years and years before deciding what to do, running more and more and more tests, because the patient could die in the meantime, right? Students in the room, I hope you considered your college choice options carefully, but what you didn't do is you didn't spend years and years and years at home after high school studying colleges in more and more gruesome detail, right? If my sons had done that, guess what? They'd be home, I'd be driving them crazy, right? And if everybody did that, all the colleges and universities would have closed, right? Because everybody'd be at home studying. So, not studying colleges. So in normal circumstances, we understand that delay and indecision is dangerous and has a cost. But when it comes to environmental issues, we get paralyzed. We've made this mistake over and over. We made this mistake for a long time with regard to stratospheric ozone depletion and with regard to acid rain and with regard to the health effects of smoking for decades, right? By the way, the history of this is really well documented in a book called Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway. So we're making this mistake now with climate change. This is a double standard. In other circumstances, we know we can't delay decisions until we have perfect understanding. We need to make decisions in a timely fashion. But with regard to environmental problems, we get paralyzed. Another flawed argument that has been used as a basis for rejecting good environmental ideas are appeals to freedom. When environmental protection is proposed, opponents will argue that it would infringe upon freedom. And they're right. It would infringe upon one type of freedom. It would infringe upon freedom to damage the environment. They never seem to mention that it would do so in order to protect freedom from environmental damage. So environmental protection works exactly like the prohibition on smoking in this room. Because of that prohibition, we're all free to breathe clean air. So when you hear appeals to freedom, ask yourself, is the speaker or the writer only considering freedom to damage the environment, or are they considering all the relevant freedoms? Freedom to damage the environment, but freedom for everybody from environmental damage. We make exactly the same mistake with regard to jobs. When environmental protection is proposed, opponents will argue that jobs would be lost in affected industries. Nowadays, one hears this most often with regard to attempts to shift to clean renewable energy sources. Opponents argue disparage this as a war on coal, a war on coal. Well, I don't mean to make light of lost jobs. However, in that particular instance, for example, there are already more jobs in the solar energy industry than in the coal industry, right? So if somebody is really motivated by jobs, they ought to be an enthusiast for solar power. Again, this is a double standard. The folks that object to environmental protection don't object to other societal developments and initiatives that cause job losses. For example, they don't object to entrepreneurship or technological innovation, but entrepreneurship and technological innovation lead to new products and new industries, which make old products obsolete and put old industries out of business. But you won't hear any complaints about that. Just jobs lost from environmental protection, even if more jobs are being created as a result of the environmental protection. And the last one of these double standards that I'd like to mention is insistence that environmental protection turn a short-term profit, as if it were, say, a business investment in expanding a toy factory or a smartphone app. Now, sometimes environmental protection does turn a short-term profit. For example, this college, Austin College, has cut its greenhouse gas emissions by nearly half over the last several years. Nearly half. In the course of doing that, we've saved almost, not quite, but almost $500,000 a year. Well, how is that possible? Well, you see, part of the way we've cut the greenhouse gas emissions is to learn to use energy more efficiently in running the buildings. And so we don't have to buy as much energy. And because we don't have to buy as much energy, we save money. So we've cut our greenhouse gas emissions and saved money at the same time. It wasn't even very hard. But good environmental protection ideas can be rejected if they're required to have an immediate cash profit like that. Often, important societal decisions require an upfront investment and then a payoff over the long term. Again, this is a double standard. We don't expect major decisions in other contexts to turn a short-term profit. We don't expect grade schools to turn a short-term profit. We don't expect basic medical research to turn a short-term profit. We certainly don't expect space exploration to turn a short-term profit. If we did, only wealthy children would have schools to go to, and we wouldn't do any basic medical research or cure any diseases, and we wouldn't be talking about whether we could escape to Mars because we wouldn't do any space exploration. So this is a fourth double standard. So I've talked about 4 objections that are used as a basis for rejecting good environmental protection ideas. Fortunately, my parents' generation didn't fall for these arguments, or our cities would still look like Beijing does today. So my task for you is to watch for these arguments. When you hear them, point them out to others, because as long as these tricks continue to work, we'll continue to fail to make good environmental decisions and continue to grind away at the planet's life support capacity. But once the tricks no longer work, environmental protection progress will resume. So I want to leave you with 2 final thoughts. The first one is, this is actually good news. We could make a great deal of progress if we would simply reject biased arguments and double standards and thereby make wiser decisions. And finally, I think our country could use some sort of noble challenge to get behind. And I can't think of anything better than leaving our descendants, all of our descendants and everybody's descendants, a healthy planet. Thank you.